In parts 1 and 2 we saw how Herbert Lange got a job with the Gestapo at Stettin and then was transferred to Aachen. As the National Socialist regime in Germany attacked Poland, Lange was appointed to the Gestapo in occupied Poznań, where he made a concentration camp and started the first homicidal gas chamber in Fort VII of that city. The victims were the mentally and physically challenged from care homes in the Reichsgau Wartheland, a province created from part of occupied Poland which was annexed to the Third Reich. Lange found that killing people in the gas chamber was not efficient, so he had devised a way of speeding up the process through gas vans, which would drive to the care homes and kill people there, whilst prisoners dug the graves of the victims. In this way, Lange was able to kill thousands of Polish and German people from the Warthegau, East Prussia and other parts of Germany.
In den frühen Morgenstunden des 22. Juni trat die deutsche Wehrmacht in breiter Front zum Angriff an, die heimtückische Bedrohung des Reiches und Europas durch die bolschewistischen Verräter abzuschlagen. Diese Bilder zeigen Ausschnitte aus dem feigen Überfall der sowjetischen Machthaber gegen das kleine, tapfere Finnenvolk im Spätherbst 1939.
On the 22nd of June 1941, Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union. Lange was soon to have work to do here too. This town is Wielki Novgorod, one of the oldest cities in Russia. It was the first capital of Russia and in the Middle Ages the second most important centre of Kievan Rus after Kiev. There are many who would regard this town as being the very cradle of Russian civilization. In 1478 it was captured by the Moscow Principality under its ruler Ivan III. After the creation of St. Petersburg in the 18th century, the city lost its economic importance, but its historic buildings remain. Almost all were damaged or destroyed during the war, but they have been rebuilt. In 1727, Novgorod became the centre of the Novgorod province, and 200 years later, in 1927, it became part of the Leningrad region. In mid-August 1941, Lieutenant General Otto Sponheimer's 21st Infantry Division, part of General Hertner's 4th Panzer Group, pushed its way through swamps and along a strongly fortified main road towards Novgorod. Resistance was fierce, the terrain suited the defence. German casualties were mounting. However, a stroke of luck aided the attackers. A map taken from a Soviet major killed in action was found. It showed the Soviet 48th Army's entire position along the Verenda River, which flows into Lake Ilmen. The map gave the exact locations of fortified positions, dummy positions, gun emplacements and machine gun posts. Then there was another piece of luck. A prisoner from the Karelian ethnic minority, a Finn, was captured, and he provided the fortification maps of Novgorod as well as the plans of the minefields. On the morning of the 15th of August 1941, the 3rd Infantry Regiment saw the glint of the golden church domes of Novgorod in the morning sun. At 17:30 hours that day, the 8th Air Corps began a heavy air raid on the Soviet positions in front of and in Novgorod. This destroyed a large part of the ancient capital, and it would be many years again before anyone witnessed such a glint of golden church domes in the morning sun. By dawn the following day, the 16th of August 1941, the German assault companies were already inside the ruined city. At 0700 hours, the swastika flew over the Novgorod Kremlin. Some 50 kilometers to the northeast of Novgorod is Chudovo. This was an important transport hub, and Manstein ordered its capture in order to sever the link between Leningrad and Moscow. Spanish troops of the Volunteer Blue Division arrived in Novgorod. Following the capture of Novgorod, after a short period of military rule, the Nazis installed their own government assisted by people such as Vasily Ponomarev and Boris Filistinsky. The city's first mayor under Nazi occupation, Fyodor Ivanovich Morozov, was killed by a young Spanish soldier during an attempted robbery. During the occupation, a great deal of the cultural heritage of the first capital of Russia was lost. All wooden buildings burned down. Collections in archaeology, history and art were stolen from the Novgorod Museum. Industries were destroyed. The material damage caused to Novgorod, according to the report of the Extraordinary Commission on the Atrocities of the Fascist Invaders, amounted to over 11 billion rubles. During the main Nuremberg trial on the 20th of November 1945, Novgorod, alongside Stalingrad, Sevastopol, Kiev, Minsk, Odessa, Smolensk, Pskov, Oryel, Kharkiv, Voronezh, Rostov-on-Don, Stalino, now Donetsk, and Leningrad were mentioned as being amongst the most damaged cities of the Soviet Union. On the very day that German troops were preparing to enter Novgorod, the 15th of August 1941, Himmler was in Minsk. Here he witnessed a shooting. This is the famous event where he clearly found it very stressful, and it would appear that he came very close to fainting. After the shooting, he visited a care home in Minsk. According to Erich von den Bach-Zalewski, Himmler, still under shock from what he'd witnessed, ordered the care home to be cleared, to use his word, but to use a more humane method to murder the inmates other than shooting. There was then only one person using methods other than shooting, and that was Herbert Lange. The following day, the 16th of August 1941, Erich von den Bach-Zalewski asked if Lange, when convenient, could visit him in Baranovice to give a demonstration of how his killing system worked. At this time, Arthur Niebuhr was experimenting on ways of mass murder. One attempt was with the use of explosives, which was a complete failure. However, experiments were made using engine exhaust in Mogilev and at the Novinky Asylum near Minsk, where Himmler had been on the 15th of August 1941. Parts of these experiments were recorded on film, and we can see the victims in this film arriving by horse-drawn cart, local staff assisting the victims in removing their clothes, and fumes from the car and lorry exhausts being pumped into a building. A local Wehrmacht commandant in Novgorod had requested the use of 3 buildings to house troops in the city, which were used as care homes for the mentally ill. The battles to capture the city had been hard. Novgorod was relatively close to the front, and with winter approaching, the troops needed somewhere to live. In both occupied Poland and inside the Third Reich proper, buildings that had once been care homes had been given over for use by the military. Whereas thousands of people had fled Novgorod, mainly in the direction of Leningrad, the damage to the buildings they had been living in during the fighting meant that there was a requirement for shelter. I presume that the commander who made the request knew that the occupants of care homes had been murdered, and the real estate that they had occupied had been given to the SS or Wehrmacht. On the 21st of September 1941, the Quartermaster General of the Wehrmacht, Eduard Wagner, later to be involved in the attempted coup against Hitler on the 20th of July 1944, asked about the policy towards inmates of asylums in the occupied territories. On the 26th of September 1941, he accepted that killing the occupants was necessary, and on the 1st of October 1941, he mentioned the Novgorod mental health care homes. Wagner was not speaking out of character. Earlier that month, he had written to his wife to say that the German army could not feel responsible for the 3.5 million people in Leningrad who would only be using the Wehrmacht's food supplies, and that Soviet POWs who did not work should not be fed. It was he who discussed with Reinhard Heydrich where the lines of responsibility were to be geographically drawn with the military, and was thus clearly aware of the activities of the SS behind the front. He also believed that the British working class was racially inferior. On the 3rd of October 1941, Lange's boss, Wilhelm Kopper, acting under the instructions of Himmler, ordered Lange to report to Novgorod. On the 4th of October 1941, Lange arrived in Novgorod by Ju-52 transport plane provided by the Wehrmacht, perhaps even by Edward Wagner himself, the same man who 2.5 years later would supply an aircraft to Klaus Schenk Graf von Stauffenberg to plant a bomb in order to kill Hitler. On board the plane, Herbert Lange was accompanied by some of his experienced killers. Presumably they brought gas in canisters with them, although the exact means of the murder of the patients in the Novgorod care homes is not known. This mission must have carried a lot of importance given that Lange and his killers were flown there. One might have thought that Einsatzgruppe A could have been sent to Novgorod. Einsatzgruppe A was then headed by Walter Stahlecker, who was then in Riga. It appears that a request was made, and it was refused. Walter Stahlecker regarded murdering Jews as having priority over the needs of the army. An SD Til commander was later based in the village of Zestania Gorka, some 30 kilometers from the centre of Novgorod. They were to murder at least 500 people, but they did not arrive until the early part of 1942. The ruins of Novgorod were recaptured by the Red Army on the 20th of January 1944. In December 1947, the last major trial of Nazi criminals in the Soviet Union took place in Novgorod, although not for crimes committed in that city. After Lange had completed his task, he returned to occupied Poland. The trip to occupied Russia had just been a brief interlude in what he was now doing, which was murdering the Jewish population of the Reichsgau Wartheland. In part 4, we shall see how he experimented with murdering people who were not physically or mentally challenged, and how he set up the first death camp on Polish soil.